Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I recently got inspired to create a vision board for myself, and I found a new way to do it that I haven't seen anyone else come up with. And being the engineer, pragmatic problem solver turned shamanic practitioner for a living, I didn't really think too much about it until I described the process to someone and he went, "Wow, that is really ingenious." And I went, "Oh, okay, this might be super helpful to someone else." So backing up a little bit, I got inspired listening to the audiobook of Tara Stewart's book called The Source. And it's basically like neuroscience meets law of attraction. And she really talks about our magnificent human capacities and how we can use the brain very effectively in service to what we want to create in our lives. And I'm super geeky about such things, so I enjoyed the book immensely. And at the end, she talks about vision boards, and she talks about how effective they are because our mind is constantly sorting what's important and what isn't. We have so much stimulus that we process as humans. And a good way to reveal this is to watch someone try to get a toddler to walk to the car. So, the toddler's like, no, I want to walk. And then they're distracted by the butterfly and the bug and the crack in the sidewalk and the breeze on their face. And when they're paying attention to all of that, walking doesn't work quite right. So they fall down. And the constant tension is between a adult who's sorting out what's relevant and not, trying to get the toddler to the car, who hasn't prioritized all of these things are irrelevant, only this is relevant. And it's powerful to be able to use our minds that way, and we really want our minds to be in service to scanning for the right opportunity. So one of the big game changers in my life was training myself to pay attention to the activation of my fight or flight system rather than tuning it out so I could try to act normal in social situations where I was quite activated. And even home alone, a lot of times until our anxiety level becomes debilitating, we're desperately trying to tune it out so that we can get on with whatever we're doing. And it's really powerful to retrain your awareness, and you can listen to my episode on anxiety if you'd like more tips and tricks with this. But when we train ourselves to pay attention to it, we can address it when it's low level. So when it's creeping up and it hasn't been on for that long, it's way easier to intervene than the point at which it literally becomes impossible to pay attention to anything else. And so that's an example of consciously wanting to program the mind for our choice of what is relevant and what is filtered out, because we can end up just not having a very good protocol of what the mind pays attention to and what it doesn't. And it's magnificent to sort of take control of this and direct it. And so I was inspired to create a vision board, and yet in the modern era, magazines just aren't the thing that they used to be. There are a whole bunch of magazines that have closed their doors forever or gone to an online version. The print magazine is not available like it was a generation ago or even 10 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the evolution. It saves a lot of trees. And we have access to images, potential images for our would-be vision board in numbers that are unprecedented with access to the internet. You can Google, any quality, peace or joy or woman in nature, man in nature, adventure, and go to the images tab and just see all these visual representations of those things. So the old-fashioned way of making a vision board, where you got a bunch of magazines and you clipped out images, may be a little harder to come by because print magazines are in shorter supply. And I Googled trying to buy some magazines and they seemed kind of expensive. And so this approach is a way to do this using the online technology. And so what's nifty about this is you get access to a lot more images, and you can create something that ultimately has a physical product. And it's a little different than flipping through magazines. Just for the record, advertisement images are actually really good for vision boards. The reason being that they're evoking a quality that people would like to have in their lives and then tying it to their product. So it's adventure and travel and connection and safety and peace and relaxation and relationship. There are all these images that evoke really core things. So advertising can give you some really, really great images, and the modern engagement with the computer can let you crop those images. So you're probably going to want to work from a desktop or a laptop. I think it might be a little harder to do this on your phone, so hopefully you have access to that. And the approach I took was just to download a whole bunch of images. Incidentally, if you're wanting to have images that are really beautiful that people generously share without royalties, there's a webpage, unsplash.com, that has some really beautiful and magnificent photography that people are willing to share. And at the same time, because your vision board is this private kind of thing, it's not something that you're using for marketing material, it's probably not a big deal if you just grab whatever images speak to you. It becomes more problematic if you're publishing it somewhere, but for most of us, our vision board's kind of a private, personal thing. So I made a whole huge folder with all these different images that I wanted. And to back up a little more, before I even started collecting images, I did some deep life review for looking at the big picture of what I was wanting to call into my life. And so you can use that pie chart where they have the, family, relationship, money, etc. And you can evaluate on a scale of 1 to 10 your happiness in all those areas and see where you'd like to make improvement. You can journal about movies that are evocative, books that you've read, dreams that you've had. If you want a more formalized process, one that I really like, there's a gal named Hilary Rushford. Her company is Dean Street Society, and she has this Elegant Excellence Goals Journal. And she's created the beginning part of this journal with some dream your life into being, workshop your life, figure out what you want. She also talks about this on her podcast, the You're Welcome podcast. And I believe it was episode 48 where she talks about workshopping your life. You can also get support from the Tara Stewart, the source book that I mentioned. There are lots of different ways to pull this in, and you may have a technique of really dreaming your world into being and really getting clear about what you are interested in creating. And I love the idea of intention with a vision board rather than goals. So goals are, here's where I want to get to, and I think it's better for this with intentions. I want to prioritize peace and spaciousness and heart connection and travel and have opportunities move organically around me. The unconscious mind can work on a whole bunch of things simultaneously. So for sure, it can be really effective to be that, like, I've set a goal and I'm completely committed and I'm not letting anything get in my way and I'm working on it. And the trouble is that you can only really work on a thing or two if you're in that like linear, I'm going to create this with my great effort. I've set my eye on the target and I will not allow my vision to be swerved. That's the adult who is committed to getting the child in the car, and everything else is irrelevant. But if you manage a toddler that way without space to honor their experience, you're going to end up with a screaming toddler strapped into the car seat, which sometimes is just the way of it with toddlers. But internally, if your own inner toddler is howling because you've taken yourself out of life balance with the eye on the prize, eye on the ball, getting to the goal, that can be really uncomfortable. And so what I find more elegant is to be really clear about what I'm prioritizing. The book Essentialism is another kind of good exploration of that. So there's a clarity about what my values are and what's important and what brings me joy and what I want to feel, but trying to push to get something done, that sort of productivity and accomplishment rather than inspiration and creativity and passion and enjoying the journey. So when you're creating your vision board, you may want to make it be, this is the visual soundtrack for the life that I would love living, rather than here are the bullseye targets of my goals. I think there's just a really different energy and feel, and you can start to work collaboratively with yourself for things that resonate at the really deep levels. There's the thinking mind that's going to come up with all the adulting tasks for the day. I have to do this, and I have to do that, and I have to do that. And it's really good to have access to that thinking mind. But if it's running the show all the time, there's something that we miss. We miss the subtle wisdom of our soul. We miss the resonance of a life well lived. And so having a process where you pause and you check in and you course correct in subtle ways. And the healthier and the more balanced I get, the more it's like, oh, I got really caught up in this project, but my body's telling me it's tired. It's time to go lay in the hammock and play with my neighbor's dogs. It's time to let my mind rest for a little while. It's time to go for a walk in nature. It's time to do some exercise. There's this ability to just subtle corrections. It doesn't have to be these dramatic life changes, but this form of presence that allows me to have a day that is in service to a lot of different aspects of myself. So my diligent, hardworking part and my passion and my creativity and having time where I'm being instead of doing and making time for connection. Sometimes we come out of balance on purpose for a season to accomplish a certain objective, and that's really valid. When I got my engineering degree, the upper division courses were a really unbalanced chapter of my life because it took so much work to get that degree. And I have no regrets about that. I'm just glad I'm not in that chapter anymore. So backing up before you create your vision board, just doing some of that deeper, what do I really care about? What do I want to create in my life? And this is especially powerful for what do I want to flow more of in? And for me, having a pretty busy mind, a little bit of a type A perfectionist personality that I provide with a lot of adult supervision, it's often more rest and being. It's a challenge to be an inspired entrepreneur. I love the work I do, and I have endless things that I would love to create. Like I'm creating this podcast episode, and it was a matter of picking 10 others of things that I would love to talk to y'all about. So in working with this in my vision board, a lot of reminding myself that I want stillness and peace and presence and connection to nature so that I don't go living in the lovely place that I live, but forgetting to go outside and enjoy that aspect of my home. So from there, going back to the pragmatic ways to do this, you can gather all these images. You can crop them to the right size and shape. So if it's an advertisement, you may cut out the toothpaste part of the image that is all about expansive, joyful, fully expressed life. And for the most part, other than the money that you want to earn in a year, Dr. Stewart recommends that you not put words on there. There are different philosophies, but that was hers. So just a number if you're trying to manifest a certain income, but then making sure that you leave space on your vision board if you don't want an overly full life, and just different things that come together. So from there, there's the prioritizing of the images, because I, of course, gathered way more than would fit. And then what's cool is there are all these softwares that'll let you work with it. So personally, I have a Corel Draw, which is just something that I've had for a long time, and I was able to work in that. Another one that's free, that's totally online, is a software called Canva. And you can create a space that's the right size that you want. So you might be like, I want an 8.5 by 11 image to put on my wall. I picked smaller ones because I wanted to be able to display it by my bed. And ultimately, you're going to use a photography service like Snapfish or some of the others that for ridiculously little money, a couple of dollars, will print images and mail them to you. You can even create directly in the collage program of some of these photo services. So they're like, come onto our website, upload your photos, create a collage, and you can play with them until you get the right vision board configuration, and then you can order a print in whatever size you like. And you can also take a screenshot so it can become the lock screen on your phone, or a photo that's in your phone that you can pull up and look at, assuming that you are as engaged with your smartphone as I am with mine. And there's just these different ways to get this image really right for you. I love being able to scale the size of the photos and play with them in relationship to each other. You're a lot more fixed if you've cut out magazine images because of the size, so you're committed to that. So I played around, I created an image, I changed the color of the background because I didn't want it to be stark white. I uploaded my final design, and then I had it printed and mailed to me in different sizes. And what I love about this is it's very easy to update if you're like, it just doesn't feel like quite it. Or if you're on a shamanic or personal growth path, a lot of times you manifest really quickly, and what's alive and true and what you're wanting to draw in and how you want to use this to hack your mind may evolve after a season. And I don't know about you, but for me, the approachability of not having to hunt down magazines, which is a little harder to source than back in days of yore, earlier days of magazines, and then glue and have a big canvas thing and all of that kind of thing. Like, there was just an ease to being able to have a really focused several hours while I created this thing rather than the larger time commitment. And now that I have a baseline, I can trade out images that feel complete for ones that are new and resonant if I need a little bit of an update and a tweak, but not a whole reimagining of the entire vision board. So I hope this gives you some ideas where this tool to really manage what your mind is prioritizing can be accessible to you. Because one of the things I find with a lot of my clients is it's hard to be a child. We're all adult survivors of childhood, and I work with people who've had terrible upbringings and people who've had pretty good upbringings. But at the end of the day, children are adapting to their circumstances to survive in the way that is most needs met for them. And even in really benign situations, we often end up with these maladaptive behaviors. And one of the ones that comes up for my psychic and energetically sensitive clients is using our psychic capacities, our third eye, unconsciously to constantly scan for threats. And so this just isn't the best use of your vision to be hyper vigilant, looking around for what could hurt you. And I'm not saying that I'm recommending walking through a dark parking lot with zero situational awareness, but in broad daylight, in a well-populated parking lot where you're not at risk of being run over through absent-mindedness, what would it be like to walk through on your way into the store with openness to possibility and opportunity? Like, what would be really yummy? Then maybe your attention comes to the human being with whom you could share a smile, or you notice something on a shelf that would be really helpful and supportive for you, or you find the right parking space. We're not able to scan for aligned opportunities if we're trying to protect ourselves from danger. And so being able to have this way to move our mind toward the potential benevolence of the world. One of the things that studies tell us is if you believe you live in a benevolent universe, your outcomes are a lot better than if you believe you live in a hostile universe. Another sort of exploration of this concept, Brené Brown talks about the Viking or victim mindset is the term that she coined. And she talks about people who are believing that, either you're a Viking and you're just plundering and taking whatever you want, or you're a victim, and looking at the higher rates of depression and addiction and suicide. Like, it's just not a mindset that results in good outcomes and sustained relationships. And so whatever approach you take, creating an image of your life with this vision board that speaks to a benevolent universe and having it in your space and engaging with it can be a way to move your mind toward that, and then to actually notice the good. We're 2.5 times more disposed to think a stressful thought than a supportive one. And that's just the hardwiring of our ancestors living in harder times than most of us in first world countries. And granted, there are a lot of psychological challenges and ways that our hardwiring and our instincts don't deal that well with the modern world. Like, I believe we suffer a lot from how little connection we have to nature. So I'm not going to say life is so much worse or better in the modern era. We have different problems, and many of those are depression and anxiety and disconnection, and there are all these activations that happen as we get out of sync with the natural world. And I love being able to sleep in a room with no bugs and, the ability to control the temperature and all those kind of things. It's a dance with the modern era, with a lot of aligning the good that we have in a way that's supportive, and then offsetting some of the ways that make our instincts freak out because it's really different. But there's huge opportunity to workshop and curate our lives in a way that's quite magnificently supportive. And the vision board is just a really good way to do that, to create this image of a benevolent universe. And what's super cool about that is if we use it to get our mind to prioritize and tune in, we actually notice when good things happen. Because again, our mind is inclined to look for dramatic stories and to scan for threats. So if you were hiking in the hills and you saw a snake one time out of 100 walks in the hills, your mind's going to remember the time and remind you every time you go out, there are snakes, there might be a threat, pay attention, be alert. And you don't notice all the perfectly safe, I didn't see anything that could possibly be harmful times. I was having a conversation, we're in COVID times, and this may or may not be true for your demographic of people. I would argue that people in Southern California out in public are mostly pretty compliant with masks. And I was discussing it with a friend, and she was saying, no, there are all these people who aren't wearing masks. And I said, well, that might be true. You might just be different places. But because we have this story that people should wear masks, that's kind of in the collective, and I don't want to get into the politics of masks. I'm choosing to wear a mask. That's something that works for me for a bunch of reasons. But the mind is going to notice and zero in on the people breaking the rules. If you're like me, who have that sort of type A rules follower, good girl, if you put up a sign that says don't be on the grass, I'm probably not going to be on the grass. I'm, really quite compliant. I have a lot of respect for authority and what you're supposed to do, and it's mandated. And then the trouble is, that's fine. It's a perfectly valid way to be, but my mind can get really loud about how everyone else should do it too. So it's an interesting thing, like, if the boarding a plane process, they say, please put your suitcase up and step out of the aisle several times. Instead of just finding my seat and settling in, I look up and I'm monitoring who is or is not complying with the instructions. And that's just a silly kind of thing to be in everyone else's business. But I have to watch myself. I'm monitoring how are people social distancing. So I know my mind is predisposed. If I see 3 people without masks and 50 people with masks, my mind's just going to gloss over the people wearing masks and focus on the rule breakers. And it can create a statistically inaccurate view of how much kindness we receive, because we'll remember the person who was mean to us, not the person who was kind and collaborative and helpful and held the door and all those kind of things. It's just the way our minds are predisposed, because if we got it wrong and we died in hunter-gatherer times, it was game over. So our many times ancestors tended to be really, really, really focused on any possible threats. And, it's not really good for quality of life, but it was darn good for survival and procreation. So that can be one of the things they talk about, helicopter moms, and people who are just so fearful about their children, which is understandable, like such a incredible value and love for your child. And at the same time, it can come out of balance, and that would be a little bit of instincts run amok that are like, I don't think there's any danger here, but what if there was? I heard a story in another part of the country 5 years ago of this thing happening, so I need to protect my child from that too. Our minds can get really loud. And so part of this whole process, by bringing in images that uniquely and powerfully resonate for you about a good life and claiming those as the compass that you're steering by, the direction that you're going overall. And as we know, when we drive somewhere, we might twist and turn and go left and right and this and that, but it's sort of that compass, using it as the overall direction my life is going at this time is toward the life that is evoked by the feeling when I look at this image. I want to feel this way in my life, so I pick an image that when I look at it, it creates this feeling. And then I gather some of those together and I create that for myself, and then I spend a few minutes breathing into it, because law of attraction will tell you that if you spend time feeling the way that you believe you would feel if you had the thing you wanted, you're setting yourself up to be in that alignment. And I don't want to go too far into law of attraction. It's complicated. It gets misinterpreted sometimes. Sometimes it makes people feel stressed when they're having a bad day. But overall, there's this invitation to start to invite in the feeling of that, which activates the feminine form of manifestation that tends to magnetize that life to you. So we can talk about the neuroscience part where we train our brain to prioritize something, but we can also talk about the shamanic energetic part where we're telling the universe what to bring us, and by being present with these images, we're magnetizing them toward us. When I taught my 6-month shamanic training, I started with a piece of paper where people created something that represented what they wanted to manifest, and many of my students came back 6 months later and said, oh my goodness, I got so much of this. In some of the classes we actually reviewed, and people were astounded because they'd forgotten that they set that intention, and yet it had moved through their life in such powerful ways. And so there's lots of evidence in lots of different ways that this works, and it's a really joyful thing to use images to basically order off the menu of life. I'd like some of this and a bit of this and this over here, please. So I hope that this gives you a really accessible way. You may end up making some adjustments. There may be a form of software that works better for manipulating images, but they're free in online ways, either with Canva or with the collage in services that print photos and mail them to you at a very affordable price point, to get something that is quite beautifully aligned to what would support you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.